Well, that was easy. I could get used to that. Most machines I work on, they are a complete mess and require quite a bit of work before the first start. It's kind of surprising how clean this oil is. The machine was running for 2 hours, and usually break-in oil doesn't look this good. So if I crack this valve open, it should automatically switch over to propane, and that light will light up. So let's crack the valve, and the light's already on. We already transitioned to propane. Hardly even noticed it missing a beat. That is pretty impressive. Might be one of the lowest values I've seen. We're at 0.2% THD without a load. Hey guys, welcome back. So recently, a company called ERAYAK reached out. They asked if I could do a review on their latest and greatest inverter generator. And as you know, I have a soft spot for generators, especially inverters. They are very quiet, fuel efficient, and produce very clean power. All my personal generators, they are inverters. And this one kind of stood out. This has some features that mine don't have. And I thought this was worthy of a closer look. So I didn't accept any compensation for this review. I didn't have to agree to any conditions, and I'm not earning commissions on this. So this review, it is unbiased. If I see something I like, I will let you know. And if I see something that can be improved on, I'll let you know that as well. So let's take a closer look. Let's see what this has to offer, and then we're going to put it to the test. We will test the sound output level, we'll test the power quality, and then I'm going to push it to its limit and see exactly how much it can take. All right, so let's start just by doing a walk around on this machine to see what exactly it has to offer. Now, if you're familiar with inverter generators, there is a standard set of features which pretty much every inverter has. This one is no exception, but there are 1 or 2 features around the corner which are unique. So we'll get to those in a minute. Anyway, starting on this side, we do have a manual pull start, but this is for backup purposes only. This is actually an electric start machine. So you shouldn't need it in most cases, but if the battery is dead, you have a plan B. Right here, we do have a knob for controlling the fuel valve, the ignition, and the choke. And I know this is an area where a lot of people have strong opinions. Myself included. I personally prefer separate controls for the ignition, the choke, and the fuel. And I think a lot of people watching probably do as well. But that's mostly because we know how to work those controls. I think a vast majority of people really don't know how to work them. So something like this takes all the thought out of it. But there are a few kind of pitfalls with this system. I guess the first one is that it needs to be calibrated properly. So sometimes I find that, when you're in the run position, maybe the choke is still on. Or maybe when you're in the run position, the fuel is actually off. So, that's something that'll become pretty apparent if that is the case. And if that is the case, we can go in and fix it. The other issue or the other complaint I hear is, how do you run the carb dry? You can't. And, well, that's true and not true. If you just shut it off, then yes, the carb is not dry, and you don't want to keep fuel. You don't want to store fuel in the carburetor. So you can actually take off the panel and drain the carb. There is a drain on the bottom of the bowl, but that requires tools. And, I guess I get the point that people don't want to take tools. They don't want to take a cover off. So there is a workaround for that too. Instead of just turning it to stop, you turn it most of the way to stop. And like that, the fuel flow will stop or be severely restricted. And within a couple minutes, the engine will stall. And once that happens, just turn it all the way off to ensure the fuel flow is stopped. Anyway, moving around here, this is kind of where everything's happening. And I guess starting on the top, we do have a vented fuel cap. So you need to make sure that is on before you start the machine, or else the tank won't vent and the engine will starve for fuel. Down here we have all the outputs. We have a 30 amp, we have some USB charging outputs, and we also have a 20 amp output. Now, these are all protected by these circuit breakers, and it seems obvious that they should be, but some inverters, some expensive inverters, don't have that. They actually rely on the inverter to detect a problem and shut things down. And of course, if the inverter is the problem, then, where's your backup system? Well, they are simple devices. They are completely independent, and they will ensure that nothing gets overloaded. So really, every generator should have these, but some surprisingly don't. We also have a couple outputs here. These are for paralleling. So this is a tri-fuel generator. This is actually a very big selling point, but it does something special. We'll talk about that in a minute. But with these parallel options, you can double the output. So when running on gasoline, this machine can pull 3,500 watts. And of course, if you have two connected together, you're going to get 7,000 watts. And when running on propane or natural gas, one machine, 3,150 watts, or twice that running on two. So that is a really nice feature. It is fairly standard, but not all inverters actually have that feature. And this right here, and maybe that to some extent, are kind of the big points on this machine. Besides being tri-fuel, you'll notice there's no knob, there's no selector to switch between gasoline and propane and natural gas. And that's because it's automatic. When you connect propane up to this and you turn the fuel valve on in the tank, it sends pressure into here. This can sense the pressure, and when it sees there is pressure, it will automatically switch from gasoline to propane. And you can just run until that tank is empty. It'll see the drop in pressure, and it will switch automatically back. So that right there is really the unique feature. I haven't seen that before, and it's actually a great feature because when running on propane, I don't know about you, but I can never tell how much fuel is left in the tank. So I'm finding that I always shut the machine down, swap the tank out before it needs it, really just as a preventative measure. And I end up wasting a bunch of fuel. So with this automatic switchover, you don't have to worry about it. It'll switch over back to gasoline. You can swap the tank over, open the valve on the new tank, and it will switch right back to propane. And the beauty of it is you actually have a lot more capacity. I mean, this tank is just over, I think it's 2.2 gallons, which is 8.5 liters, which in itself will run this unit for quite a while. And then when you add a tank like that, which is a 5-gallon, 20-pound tank, you're basically tripling your runtime between the two tanks. So yeah, that is a nice feature. These machines are very efficient, and between the two tanks, you could easily run for a day or more. It really depends on what kind of load you're putting on this machine. Anyway, this doesn't ship with oil. Actually, small engines never do. So the first thing we need to do is add some oil. I think the battery's back here too, so we'll connect that up as well. So we need to pull this panel off. While I'm at it, I'm going to pull the panel off over here, not because we need to, but because I want to see everything that's inside. So I just want to show you this real quick. I did unpackage this before turning the camera on, but it was packaged quite well. There was plenty of padding inside, and it was actually shipped in a box, inside of a box, with padding in between. So it arrived completely intact, no damage from shipping. And inside the box also was a user manual, and we have this little toolkit or accessory pack right here. There is a special canister for filling the oil. If you've ever changed the oil on an inverter, you know it is a messy process. We have an adapter for that 30 amp output. We have an extra spark plug and a spark plug tool. And in this bag right here, we have the propane line and regulator. So I just pulled the battery out to get a better look at it. It is very light, and according to the label, it is a lithium-ion battery, and you can see it is quite small. You know, lithium-ion, there is a lot of energy density, so it is a good space saver. Anyway, you can just get a glimpse in there of the inverter module. That is usually in the front. That is the air intake, and that air travels along the machine, actually between the plastic and the engine, and exits out the back. So that's how this thing stays cool. Anyway, we do have a quick disconnect right here for the battery. It is not connected, so once we get oil in there, we will connect that up. And the really nice thing about it is that the plug they used, it is the same type of plug that you see on most battery tenders. So if you need to charge it, you can get a battery tender capable of charging lithium ion and just top this thing off. Anyway, we can see a few things here. I guess first off, we have the carburetor with a fuel solenoid. So that is likely how they're doing the switchover, because when running on propane, you have to stop the flow of gasoline. Otherwise, you're going to be running the engine way too rich. So this is what energizes. It blocks the flow of fuel from the carburetor and allows only the gasoline to flow into that engine. You know, we have the air box right there with an air filter, I presume. Yep, it is a foam filter. And we kind of have access to the valve cover. Now, if you actually needed to check or set the valves, though, you would likely need to get the clamshell off. And that, unfortunately, is a common problem with inverters. I don't think I've seen one yet where you can adjust the valves without taking this outer skin off. So this one is no exception. Anyway, the oil fill is right here. So I'm going to fill it with straight weight 30 oil, at least for the break-in. Once it's broken in, I will run it on synthetic. And that's kind of an area of debate, you know, whether you need to run it on synthetic or regular. You know, in the grand scheme of things, it probably doesn't matter. What's important is that, you know, this is a new engine. You know, the parts, they have to get familiar with each other. And while they do that, they wear in and they produce a bit of metal in the oil. And these engines, actually most generator engines that are portable like this, they have no oil filter. So, you know, the first couple hours of operation, you want to change the oil at least a couple times until you're sure it's coming out clean. So, yeah, we will fill it up. I think this takes 600 milliliters, and then we'll connect up the battery. So I've already put in 200 milliliters. This is the second batch. So these containers, they are great for filling inverter generators. I guess the only downside is that, you know, this machine does take 600 milliliters. So we need to fill this up a total of 3 times to top the machine off. And we are filled up just to the last thread or two. So you technically don't need the dipstick to check it. You know, if you can see you're filled up right to the last thread, then you know you have plenty of oil. In this case, we are filled up and should be good to go. So we'll get the zip tie off, and I'll get the battery back in first before connecting it up. Now, there is a tie down. It's actually very similar to the one that Honda uses in the EU 6500. So it can be a little bit tricky just to keep it on kind of the back while getting the battery in. You got to keep tension on it or else it'll fall off. So there's a few things of interest over here. I guess first off, we have the ignition coil. So if you're having problems with spark, potentially it could be as simple as swapping out that. Here is the multi-function knob, and we have a much better look at the inverter module. Up above, we can just see the fuel tank, and this one, it is actually fed by gravity. So that is a good thing because, some machines, like the Honda EU2000, it actually has a fuel pump. So the fuel tank is below the level, or at least partially below the level of the carburetor. So you can't rely on it to gravity feed. If the carburetor is empty, it's going to take at least, 9 or 10 pulls to fill the bowl up before you have any chance of starting it. Something like this, you just turn it on, wait a few seconds, the bowl will fill via gravity. So that is always a nice feature. And then you have the starter rope right here going to the starter recoil. Now, you may notice that it's right up against the inverter, and unfortunately all inverters are made that way. So if you break the rope and you don't have electric start, then you have to change the rope. And in order to do that, you do have to remove the clamshell and get the inverter module out of the way. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's difficult, but it is very time consuming, and the spaces that you're working in are pretty tight, and sometimes getting the stuff back together, it can take a while. Anyway, I think we're ready for the first start. So I'm going to get this panel back on. I'm going to run it on gasoline to start. Although the manual doesn't say you need to, some manufacturers say that for break-in, you do not want to run on propane. So I am going to heed their words. We will run this the first few hours on gasoline, and then we will do the full round of testing with various fuels and, of course, pushing this thing to the limit. So let's get the cover back on. We'll get some fuel in it, and we'll go for the first start. All right, let's give this a try. I've got the kilowatt plugged in, so assuming it starts, we will double check the output. And I've also plugged in a light so we can see right away if the power comes on. So I'm going to turn the knob to the start position. So that opens the fuel valve, chokes the engine, and enables spark. And when I did that, the light lit up too for the electric start. So I am going to give it a few seconds, give that carb a chance to fill up, and then we'll try starting the engine. Well, that was easy. I could get used to that. Most machines I work on, they are a complete mess and require quite a bit of work before the first start. This one, not so much. All we did was add oil, plug in the battery, and push a button, and this thing came right to life. The engine sounds great, and we're making power, and the output looked pretty good. We were almost dead on at 60 hertz, and the voltage was a little bit above 120. At 124 volts, which is my preference. I'd rather be a little bit above than below. So we are looking really good. So let's get this outside. I do want to run it for a couple hours to properly break in the engine. We'll change the oil, and then we'll put it to the real test. Actually, before we bring this outside, this also came with an optional accessory pack. Included in that pack is a cover But more importantly, it also includes a wheel kit. Now, technically, you don't need it for this machine. Empty without fuel, this comes in at about 54 pounds, so it's not too heavy. That said, though, wheels are definitely welcome. So let's get the kit installed, and then we'll get this outside. So I'm not going to bore you with the assembly on this, but it does seem to come with some good instructions. So I will get this kit together and then bolt it onto the machine. So I did put on a light load of 750 watts. So the plan is just to let this run for an hour, maybe two. We'll let the engine break in. I'm going to change the oil, repeat the process, and then we should be good to go. So we're just at the 2-hour mark. I'm going to take the load off the machine. We'll let it cool down a bit, and then we'll do the first oil change. It's kind of surprising how clean this oil is. The machine was running for 2 hours, and usually break-in oil doesn't look this good. So that is a very good sign. Anyway, I've already pre-measured out the correct amount of oil to add back into the engine. I'm just going to use this right here. This did not come with the machine. Actually, I got this on Amazon fairly inexpensive, and it's very useful for draining oil out, but also putting it back in. So it's been another 2 hours, 4 hours in total, and no issues to report. So I do want to change the oil again before doing the load testing, but since we're here, And I'm thinking, let's just try the propane function real quick. So I am going to reduce the load a bit to 750 watts. I'm going to purge this propane line right here. We'll hook it up to the generator and turn the propane on. See if I can switch over without missing a beat. All right, let's give this a try. The load, it's been reduced to 750 watts. So if I crack this valve open, it should automatically switch over to propane and that light will light up. So let's crack the valve and the light's already on. We already transitioned to propane. Hardly even noticed it missing a beat. So let's close the valve, see if it can switch back. A little bit rough, but it did it without stalling, so I would say that is a pass. So let's increase the load to 1500 watts. We'll try the same test again. So right now we are running on gasoline. I'm going to crack the valve open on the tank. We're now running on propane. It was just that easy. A slight hiccup, but it kept running. So let's turn it back off, see if it'll switch with that kind of a load. Yeah, no problem. So this feature seems to work, at least with a moderate load. Not too bad. Yeah, like last time, the oil came out looking pretty good. So I think we are ready for some serious testing. So the engine, it has been refilled with oil, this time 10W30 synthetic. And I also brought out another space heater. So with these two on high, it will pull 3000 watts. And when running on gasoline, this machine should be capable of 3500 watts. So to get there, we have some additional loads over here. The two lights on the bottom, they are 200 watts each, and the two on the top are 100 each. So with everything turned on, we will be pulling 3600 watts, which is about 100 watts overrated. So it'll be interesting to see how the generator reacts to it. So I'm going to get it started. Without a load, we will double check the power quality this time. We'll bring on a 1500 watt load, do the same, bring it up to 3000, see how things are looking. And assuming it's running well, we will go for the max of 3500 watts and then go a little bit beyond. And these here are the tools that I'm going to use to measure the power quality. The oscilloscope on the left is just going to let us visualize the power output. So right now I am connected to my utility power. When I click this switch, we will see what the power looks like. So there's going to be a lot of glare out there. I'm going to take screenshots and put that up on your screen so you can see it a little bit better. Anyway, most non-inverter generators, the sine wave is not very clean. It's very jagged, very distorted. Inverters actually are quite clean. It might actually be cleaner than this right here. So we will find out in a minute. And the meter on the right, this measures total harmonic distortion. On my power grid, the power should be running at 60 hertz. And harmonic distortion is basically frequencies other than 60 hertz coming in. And that power can't be used. So it's dissipated as heat and can damage sensitive electronics. So, my utility is providing 1% or actually 1.9% THD, which is considered safe. Anything below 5% should be very safe for sensitive electronics. And the inverter generator out there likely is going to come in at about the same. So yeah, let's get these tools out there. We will get it started and see what we see. I'm going to use this meter to measure the sound output level. This measures the decibels. When I'm not talking, it's at about 41 decibels. And when I'm talking right now, we're maxing out at close to 75 decibels. So that'll give you some perspective as far as how loud the generator is. Now, this is going to be placed about 25 feet away from the machine. That is pretty impressive. Might be one of the lowest values I've seen. We're at 0.2% THD without a load, and the sine wave looks fantastic. So let's put on a load of 1500 watts and check back on the power quality. So at 1500 watts, the THD went up to 1.1%. The sine wave still looks absolutely perfect. So let's double it to 3000 watts. Things are looking good at 3000 watts. The engine not having any issue at all pulling that load. THD is only at 1.2%, and the sine wave looks unchanged. So now we're going to go for the max. The two bottom lights, that'll total 400 watts, and then one of the lights on the top will be another 100. So we're now at 3,500 watts. Technically, we're probably a little bit higher. Those space heaters aren't exactly 1,500 watts each. Let's turn on the last light. Oh, and that did it. So yeah, 3,500 watts, that is the limit of this machine. So I am going to reset. I'm going to bring the load back up close to the max. We'll probably bring it up to 3,400 watts and just see how long we can hold that. Just keeping in mind that the space heaters are technically a little bit over 1,500 each. So likely we're not going to be able to power everything here because, well, it's an overload. And most inverters, when they're overloaded, you have to actually shut the engine down to reset them. So you can see here on the control panel, the blinking light. That's indicating that the inverter shut down due to overload. So I've already shut off the heavy loads, so I'm going to kill the engine, and then we can restart it. So I'm going to get this back to 3,000 watts. And I'm going to turn on the bottom two lights. They'll be 200 watts each. So that's going to bring us right up against its max rating. So let's give it a few minutes, see if it can hold. It is holding, but it's struggling. I can tell we're kind of right at the edge. So at basically the max, THD is only 1.4%, and sine wave virtually unchanged. So yeah, pretty impressive from a power quality standpoint. And the 3,500 watts, to be honest, I didn't think it was going to get there. You know, this engine is a small engine. It's only 150 cc's. And on most generators, an engine that size would max out at about 2,500 watts. But not this one. It's handling the 3,500 without issue. Well, I think that's a pass. You know, it's been a few minutes. It's holding the load without issue. So I'm going to take the load off. We'll give the engine a chance to cool down a bit. And then we'll switch over to propane and see if we can make it to 3,000 watts. All right, let's make the switch to propane. All right, we are now running on propane. Let's bring the load on. We'll start with 1,500 watts. No issues. We'll bring it up another 750. And now 3,000. The engine sounds good, so no issues pulling a 3,000 watt load on propane. So it's handling the 3,000 watts just fine. So let's add another 200, which is going to bring it just a little bit over the rated for running on propane. And yeah, it's doing it without issue. So let's turn off these. We'll swap it for one of the bottom ones. So we're back to 32. Sounds like we are running out of horsepower. 33. How about 34? Yeah, the engine's slowing down, so let's turn some of these off. So definitely when running on propane, you don't have as much horsepower as on gasoline. You're actually down about 10%. But still, even with that said, we made it to 3,300 pretty confidently. So yeah, propane, definitely a viable option on this machine. So let's just take the load off and we'll just let things cool down. Well guys, that's pretty much a wrap. You know, this generator performed very well. On the power quality side, I think it was the cleanest I have ever seen. We started at 0.1% THD and we topped out at 1.2%. And the sine wave looked perfect regardless of the load. So this generator, it actually produces power cleaner that my utility delivers. You know, as far as the engine goes, I had my doubts. Most generators with a 150cc engine would only be able to produce 2,500 watts, but this one delivered on what's printed on the front. We did reach 3,500 watts when running on gasoline, and on propane, we actually exceeded it. We pulled 3,300 watts. So this machine handled everything that I threw at it. So if you want to find out more about it, I will leave some links down in the description. I also want to thank ERAYAK for giving me a chance to test this out. You know, it really says a lot that they're willing to send their product to me, because if it can't deliver, they can't hide it. And this one delivered. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching. All right, not quite done yet. Although we tested this very thoroughly, there is one major feature that inverters have that I was not able to test, and that is their ability to run in parallel, where you can double the wattage capability. You know, in this case, we found the max when running on gasoline was 3,500 watts, but if we connected two of these together with parallel cables, we could double it to 7,000 watts. Anyway, at the time, I didn't have a second machine to do that with. Well, fast forward a month, and ERAYAK sent me a very similar model to the one we just tested. There are a couple differences, but the wattage rating on this machine is the same. So we can actually parallel this one with the one we just tested using the cable that they provided. So let's get this one out of the box. We'll take a quick look at the differences, and then we'll get these both outside and try to pull 7,000 watts. So like the other one, this one came with a jug to fill the oil, little power adapter, and a spark plug tool. We do have a manual as well as a propane regulator. So this is a tri-fuel generator. It has the same set of controls as the one over here, and it also has the same power ratings. The only difference on this side actually is the fact that the model ends in an M, which means this is a manual start version only. And this one has an E for electric start. So on this other machine, really that is the biggest difference, is no electric start. But in its place, they did put a carbon monoxide sensor with the ability to bypass it. Because sometimes, depending upon the way the wind blows, the exhaust could hit the sensor, causing a false alarm. So they at least give you the control or the ability to make the decision as to whether you want to use that sensor or not. Anyway, this, like the other, did not ship with oil. So let's get some oil in there. We'll get some fuel in the tank, and we will do the first start. Yeah, I think that's pretty much perfect. I added 650 milliliters, and you can see the oil, we're right up to the last thread or two. So that should be good. As you can see, this is the same exact engine as the other one. We also have the same fuel solenoid so that you can make the auto switch to propane without shutting things down. Now, one thing to keep in mind though, I did say you could run this until the propane is empty and it will just switch back automatically, which is true. The problem is when it switches back, the propane tank, although empty, it's not completely empty. So it is going to build pressure again and switch back to propane. And of course, the pressure is going to drop off and it's going to switch back to gas. So it might cycle a few times. So it's better actually to shut just the propane valve off when you're getting low or you see that it's starting to cycle between the two fuels. Anyway, I think we're all set to put the cover back on, but I did want to point out one more thing. This electric start, it was super quiet. You really couldn't hear anything, yet the engine was turning over. And I think the way they're doing it on this model is actually using the generator to rotate the engine to act as a motor, which is a very unique feature. I have not seen that before. Anyway, let's get the cover on. We'll get some fuel in the tank and we'll start it up. All right, fuel valve's on, choke's on. We'll just give it a second. We'll let the carb fill up with fuel, then we'll try to start it. Okay, good. The engine started right up. Sounds good. And that light came on right away. And like the other machine, we were producing 124 volts, almost exactly 60 hertz. So before we do the parallel test, I do need to break this one in properly like we did over here. And once that's complete, I will meet you outside and we will do the parallel test. Like last time, I'm just going to put on a light 750 watt load. We'll let that run for an hour or two, change the oil, and then repeat the process again. But the next time around, we'll bump it up to 1500 watts. So we've actually been running for about 3 hours now. I got tied up with some stuff. So I'm taking the load off, we'll let it cool down, we'll do the first oil change and see how it looks. I think you can see the oil looks really good. Considering this is break-in oil and we just ran the machine for 3 hours, it came out really clean. So I'm going to run it for another, I would say, hour or two. This time we'll double the load to 1500 watts. So it's 2 hours later, no issues to report. So we'll take the load off, let it cool down, and this will be the last oil change. At this point, it's ready for the full load test. And like the first oil change, the oil came out nice and clean, so no concerns about the break-in oil. I'm just getting things set up, and I thought I'd just step back for a second and talk about paralleling in general. I get asked sometimes, can I parallel non-inverter generators? And the technical question is yes, you can, but I don't recommend it. The reason for that is because you have to manually synchronize the hertz, the voltage, and the sine wave. Also, the engines need to be matched. The governors need to respond the same way. Basically, there's a lot of things you have to do right. And if anything goes wrong, they go out of sync. Current starts to flow from one machine to the other. And if you're lucky, you just trip a circuit breaker. And if you're unlucky, you destroy two perfectly good machines. So inverters, they are the way to go if you want to double your power and do it safely. That said, though, there are situations where you could do something that may not be so safe. And 120 volt inverters are a good example of that, because when you parallel them, a lot of people want to connect them to their house. And your house is expecting input in leg 1 and leg 2, and 120 volts, you only have one leg. So you can't fully power your house. I mean, obviously the 240 circuits aren't going to work. And on the 120 circuits, only half of them will work. Whatever leg you feed. The other leg will be dead, so half the 120s will be dead. And that kind of leads me to the next question I get asked as well. Can I just take the one leg I have from the 120 volt generators and attach it to leg 1 and leg 2 of my breaker panel or my transfer switch? And the answer is maybe. To be sure, you really should get an electrician in to see how your house is wired, because there is a scenario I can think of where that would not be a good situation. And it comes to really how you wire your house. If you have a separate cable with 3 wires each for each circuit, then I think that would likely be okay. You have a total of 6 wires. Each circuit has its own neutral. But there is something called a multi-wire branch circuit, which uses a cable like this. Instead of 6 wires, there's 4. The main advantage to this is that you can run one cable, power 2 circuits, and do that safely with less wires. So it's going to cost less. But, there's a couple of criteria that need to be met to do this. And one important one is that each leg is 180 degrees out from each other, meaning when one is positive 120 volts, the other one is negative. And like that, the neutral wire only sees the imbalance, and the max that it can see is half the load of circuit 1 and circuit 2. But if you feed basically the same leg into your transfer switch onto leg 1 and leg 2, now these wires, they're not 180 degrees out, meaning they're both positive at the same time, both negative at the same time. And like that, the neutral can be overloaded by twice its rating. And that could definitely heat up and potentially burn your house down. So yeah, feeding the same leg into your breaker box, don't do that lightly. Get an electrician to check it out and either say it's safe, or if it's not safe, they likely can make it safe. And with that in mind, that kind of brings me to the parallel cable that I got from ERAYAK. Most cables that are 30 amps or less look like this. You have a ground, a neutral, and a live wire, 120 volts only. Now, most manufacturers, ERAYAK included, use cables like this for applications over 30 amps. So you can see it's a very beefy cable compared to this Yamaha one, and it's very capable of carrying the current that these machines make. But my concern is they've actually wired it so that leg 1, which is the only thing that this produces, is distributed onto leg 1 and leg 2. And that's where you can get into trouble if you connect this to your breaker panel. So I did take a look online to see what other manufacturers are doing for a scenario like this, where you have two generators in parallel producing 58 amps. So I was looking for a 120 only plug, a parallel kit, and I couldn't find one in the 50 to 60 amp range. The only thing I found was a plug like this, which is a 30 amp plug, and they said, well, you can do 50 amps with it, which I'm not sure I believe. And then everyone else had a plug like this for 120 volts, kind of doing the same thing. You know, I actually saw ones listed from Westinghouse, Champion, and a few others. So, you know, I wouldn't say that they're doing something that other manufacturers are not, but I kind of question whether it should be done by any manufacturer. Now, I am not an electrician. I know there's a lot of electricians out there who watch these videos, so maybe some of you will add to the comments, kind of giving me your opinion on this, but you know, I'm pretty sure if you have a multi-branch circuit, this type of setup could be a real danger. So anyway, enough talking. Let's get this fully hooked up. We will get the engines started, and we'll see how much we can get out of these when running in parallel. All right, let's give this thing a try. I've got both machines refueled, the parallel cable is connected, and I have 7,500 watts of load on standby. Now the load bank, I can't use it in this case because the load bank, it is wired for 240 volts. But using these space heaters, we can actually push it beyond what this is capable of. You know, these max out together at 7,000 watts. So the plan is just to bring on the load incrementally until we reach the max and the inverters shut down. So let's get the engine started and we'll see how much it can take. At 3,000 watts, the engines hardly even notice the load. If we weren't running in parallel, you know, we'd actually be close to the max. If you remember from earlier, 3,500 watts was the tipping point. So if we turn on the third space heater on high, that's going to bring us up to 4,500 watts, which of course we couldn't do if we didn't have the parallel cable. So let's try that. Now we're at 4,500 watts. Seems like there is no issue, so I'll give it a minute, and then we'll bring the load up to 6,000, and then finally find its limit. So the engines, they're definitely working pretty hard at 6,000 watts. You know, I can feel the heat of these 4 space heaters from here. So yeah, pretty impressive. Now each of these technically aren't exactly 1,500 watts. You know, on high, they're actually a little bit more. So with these 4 on, I'm estimating actually that it's closer to 6,200 watts. Plus we have another 100 watts for that light, so that brings us to 6,300 watts. And if I turn this last space heater on low, that's another 600. So that's gonna put us right to the point of overload. And we might actually cause a shutdown, but let's try it. And yeah, the machine here on the left, it's slowed down, and I can actually see that overload light blinking a little bit. So if we leave it like that, it's probably going to trip the inverter. But it's definitely holding its own. Anyway, let's get these shut down. We'll let the engines cool down, and then we'll shut it down. Well, guys, that's pretty much a wrap. You know, these machines handled pretty much everything I threw at it. And as we saw earlier, the power quality was extremely good at about 1% THD. Now, the scary thing is that, you know, I have 2 Yamaha EF2000s. When I run those in parallel, they produce less power than just one of these machines. And of course, if you put 2 of these in parallel, you're producing a lot of power. You know, 7,000 watts, that rivals some of the larger portable generators. So pretty impressive. Anyway, you know, if you want to find out more about these, I will leave links in the description. And I wanted to thank ERAYAK again for sending these to us so that we can learn a little bit about them. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.